I want to welcome and thank you all for joining us this evening in honor of the 2017 Excellence in Public Service Award, honoring recipient James Mattis, U.S. Secretary of Defense. My name is Katie Hogan, for those of you that don't know me, and I oversee the Washington Academic Internship Program for the John Glenn College of Public Affairs right here in D.C. WAPE allows Ohio State undergraduates to spend a semester in Washington, D.C. to live and intern while receiving academic credit. I'm pleased to share that this summer we have our largest WAPE cohort ever with 32 John Glenn Fellows. I would like to take a couple of moments to recognize a couple of very important groups that we have with us in the room tonight. I would like to recognize and thank the OSU DC Alumni Club, who is an important partner for WAPE in the John Glenn College in Washington, D.C. The OSU DC Alumni Club is an important partner because they assist us with placing our students in quality internships and matching our students with alumni mentors while they go through their program. Students also enjoy events with the OSU DC Alumni Club. Most recently, we partnered with the club, the Black Alumni Society, and the Glenn College for a group viewing of Hidden Figures. I would also like to recognize the Glenn College DC Outreach Committee, which serves as a steering committee for WAPE here in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Thomas is in the back. He's our chair of the DC Outreach Committee. Very excited. What's most impressive about this committee is that they meet once a month and serve as a support system to continue to improve WAPE programs and student support. This year, I'm very proud to share that they worked to raise 4 full housing scholarships for this year's WAPE crowdfunding campaign, allowing 4 of our John Glenn Fellows to be with us this summer in D.C. without the burden of the cost of housing. I would also like to recognize and thank a very special group that we have in the room, which is the alumni of Senator Glenn's staff. This group has a very important connection to our group. They meet with the WAPE students every semester to share their precious memories of Senator and Annie Glenn and talk about what a model for public service he was. They also graciously host our students in internships and serve as their mentors, and we're so grateful to them to be connected in this way. Thank you to the alumni of Senator Glenn's staff. These are only a few examples of the incredible ways that alumni and friends contribute to making WAPE an excellent program and making the student experience in Washington exceptional. If alumni would like to get involved, you can do so by mentoring students, hosting students for internships in your office, hosting the entire cohort to your office for a study tour, or even simply taking a student to lunch or coffee to share more about your career with them. We are so grateful to all of our alumni and friends for the many ways that you pay it forward, and WAPE would not be the program that it is without you. So thank you, alumni and friends, once again. I would now like to introduce the Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, Dean Trevor Brown. Dean Brown has been with the John Glenn College for over 15 years, serving as director and now dean, when the John Glenn School became the John Glenn College in 2015. His areas of expertise include public management and government contracting. Among his many accomplishments, he served as the U.S. project manager to the Parliamentary Development Project, which provided technical assistance to the Ukrainian government. He is a fellow with the National Academy for Public Administration, and the Institute for National Government Purchasing awarded him Scholar of the Year in 2013. Not only is he an accomplished academic and a well-respected leader at Ohio State University, but he is one of the biggest supporters of our John Glenn Fellows in the Washington Academic Internship Program. Shortly after every Glenn Fellow is admitted to WAPE, they participate in a mandatory on-campus orientation where they learn about expectations for the program and how they'll get an internship in DC. Dean Brown always makes it a priority to attend these orientations, and he is one of the first to welcome them into the WAPE program and let them know how proud he is that they'll be representing the John Glenn College while in Washington, D.C. He also makes a deal with them. He tells them that they need to become very good networkers. Of course, I agree. And evidence of this would be if they obtain one of the elusive Ohio State pins with the Capitol building in the background, like the one I'm wearing tonight. You wouldn't believe how seriously the students take this. They make it one of their #1 goals while they're in Washington to obtain one of the Ohio State pins, a testament to how much they respect our dean. Please join me in welcoming Dean Trevor Brown.
You're not getting mine. It's right there. Well, good evening, everyone. As you heard, I'm Trevor Brown. I'm the dean here. I'm proud to welcome you all to a wonderful and celebratory event Katie did such a fabulous job recognizing so many of the groups that are such a part of the Washington experience for the Glenn College, but I just want to highlight two others. The first is we are tremendous partners with Ohio State's Office of Government Relations here in Washington, D.C., and I'd just like to point out the relatively new director, Stan Skokie, over there. So if you haven't had a chance to meet him yet, please do go up and introduce yourself. We wouldn't be able to do what we're able to do here in Washington without the assistance of the Office of Government Affairs. I'd also like to acknowledge somebody else who made the Glenn College, and before that, fundamentally, the Glenn School possible. We're honored to have in attendance the founding director of the Glenn School, Dr. Charles Wise, who's sitting right over here. So please join me in celebrating Charlie. And then finally, I would be remiss if not to celebrate the accomplishments of the person who stood up here before me. Katie Hogan does such a tremendous job at creating such a first-class experience for all of our students. So please join me in thanking Katie. So in addition to fundamentally conferring this wonderful honor tonight and describing a little bit about the honor, it's also my duty to just give you a very brief update on the college that bears Senator Glenn's name. And I really want to focus just briefly on the wonderful things that we're doing here in Washington, D.C., in large part because the Senator would be so proud of what we've accomplished here, given that so much of his service has been here in Washington. So as you just heard, we have had our record number of applications and enrollments for our Washington Academic Internship Program with 32 fellows here this summer. Raise your hands, folks, so you know who they are. Okay, that's good. And so when we finish, as you heard Katie said, it's their job to mingle, and it's your job to make them mingle with you. So don't be bashful. Go up and say hi. I also want to thank all the mentors and intern hosts that are in attendance as well. The program is largely a success because so many organizations across Washington, D.C. Have felt a need to create opportunities for young people to experience Washington. So thank you to all of those. So WAPE is our real anchor here in Washington, D.C. We've been running this program for quite a long while. Several iterations of this program have come since the founding of the Glenn Institute when the Senator gave his papers to the university. In addition to WAPE, we have been active in hosting events here. Some of you were able to attend our event in the spring with Dr. Herb Asher, a renowned political scientist from Ohio State University, who came and offered his thoughts on the first 100 days of the Trump administration, which was a fascinating insight into a view of someone from Ohio about what's been going on in the first 100 days. Back in Columbus, we've brought Washington to Columbus through a new partnership we started 2 years ago with the Moritz College of Law entitled Congressional Conversations, where we bring a sitting legislator to come and speak with Moritz students in the law school and Glenn students to share sort of the intricacies of the policymaking process. So we've had Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman and Pat T. Berry and Nancy Pelosi who've come and spoken to our students. On campus, we have a new Bachelor's of Science in Public Policy Analysis, a new certificate for working professionals in public sector leadership. We just finished the 5th year of our Public Safety Leadership Academy, which trains law enforcement officials for positions of leadership. And next week, we will welcome 25 young African leaders for the Mandela Fellows Program that will take place in Columbus. Now, it was a wonderful year of activity. You can see that the Glenn College has been very, very active and growing. But we also said goodbye this year. We said goodbye to the namesake of the Glenn College, Senator Glenn. And we did that in a celebratory memorial that started at the State House of Ohio, where the senator lay in rest for a day following his death, and then was carried by the Marines up to a memorial service on campus. And that wonderful ceremony, for those of you who were able to attend, you know it mapped to the career of the senator in terms of his service to the military, the space program, the Senate, and then finally higher education. He was then buried on April 6th here in Washington at Arlington Cemetery in a stirring service at the Old Post Chapel. He's just down the slope from the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and I want to thank all of those of you who've gone and paid your respect to the senator since that time. Now, this brings us to this award tonight, Excellence in Public Service. The passing of Senator Glenn caused all of us in the Glenn College, or those connected to the Glenn College, to think deeply about his life of service and public leadership. And I was often asked in the wake of his death about whether there would ever be another Senator Glenn. And that's an easy question to answer on the one hand, because it's no. I mean, there will never be another first American to orbit the earth. And while in the future there will likely be someone older than Senator Glenn who ventures into space, that person will probably not likely be the only senator to carry 4 terms in the state of Ohio, and the oldest person to travel in space will probably not have been the only office holder in Ohio to win all 88 counties. All of this after serving his country in World War II and Korea as a Marine aviator. But upon reflection, there are lots of people who are imbued with the same spirit of service as Senator Glenn. Service to something grander, something bigger, something more impactful than oneself. That spirit is the basis of this award that we bestow for now over 2 decades. Excellence in Public Service, the name of the award, honors someone whose career has demonstrated that same commitment as Senator Glenn to the advancement of the common good. We, all of the winners of this award in the past, over several tens or 20s of them, all of these winners have decorated resumes. And this year's winner has a similarly decorated resume, which in brief includes decades of service as a Marine, a general, and now the Secretary of Defense. But lots of people have decorated resumes. In the immediate wake of Senator Glenn's death, I think the truly defining characteristic of this award is that all of the winners share a similar commitment to service and the set of values that underlied everything that Senator Glenn did and stood for. There's been a lot of press coverage about this year's honoree, and much of that has focused on his decorated resume and how well that has prepared him for the vexing military challenges and threats before us as a liberal democratic society. But there's also been a lot of coverage of his character and his demeanor. He's studied, he's thoughtful, he's resolute, he's loyal, he's honorable, and fundamentally, he's committed to serve. When Senator Glenn joined Ohio State in the late 1990s and created the Glenn Institute, his stories and talks, of which he gave many to students, to young people, to faculty, to community members, to staff members, were largely about his Senate service. Now, I remind you, he had just left the Senate, so those stories were fresh in his mind. Several years later, those stories changed. He still talked about the Senate every now and again, but he became more expansive about his years in the space program and his love of exploration and discovery. But in the last couple of years, and it was, for me at least, only until those last couple of years, he talked less and less about those momentous experiences in the Senate and in space, and more about what were perhaps the most profound experiences for him, his service as a Marine in war. Now, Marines are special. My father-in-law is a Marine, and he shared with me that only 3 to 4% of all of the armed forces have served as Marines. But nearly 25% of all Medal of Honor winners are Marines. In Vietnam, around 8% of those who served were Marines. But if you go to the Vietnam Memorial, you count the names, and about 30% of those are Marines. They are the first to fight. Senator Glenn was quietly very proud of being a Marine, and he was buried as a Marine. And as he approached the inevitable end, and he knew it was coming, he had a list of things that he wanted accomplished. Now, I want to be clear, it wasn't like it was a bucket list or anything like that, but as the person who happened to be sitting in the chair with the title of the dean of the college that bore his name, I felt the pressure that there were some things he would like to have accomplished, even though in his quiet way he never directed me to do them. One of them was foremost to solidify the higher ed institution which bore his name. And it was not for any grandiose sense that he should have something that bears his name. No, on the contrary, it was because he believed so fundamentally in the mission of the college to inspire citizenship and develop leadership in the public sector that he knew that the college would be his institutional legacy. So task one was to solidify and embed that institution within the university, hence becoming a college. Along with that, he wanted a band. He always thought that if you were to become a college, you got a band. Now, I had some minor influence on us becoming a college, but I'm of lowly stature within the university. I did not have the ability to secure him a band. But what we did come to realize, and I think Lynn, who's going to share some remarks here in a moment, has known perhaps all her life, is that the senator loved music. Lynn may offer more insight of this, but part of it, I suspect, is his love and admiration for Annie. And Annie was an accomplished musician. She was a music major at Muskingum College, where they went to college together. And so as we planned for the senator's memorial service and his burial, much of his desire and wishes were around the music that would be played. If you attended the memorial in Columbus or were able to watch the burial online, you had the opportunity to hear some of the music that the senator relished. So we didn't get him a band, but we did send him off with songs that were the ones that he wanted. Lastly, he also wanted certain people who he respected tremendously. He wanted those people connected in some way to the college. And at the top of that list was Secretary James Mattis. I've never had the privilege of meeting Secretary Mattis before this evening, but I feel as if I have a very strong sense of his character by virtue of having served Senator Glenn. Senator Glenn was a remarkably vibrant person throughout his life, but like any human being, he flagged towards the end. He tired. His energy was dissipating. However, on those days when he came to the office and he talked on the phone with Secretary Mattis, he lit up like a Christmas tree. He really just awakened. We saw that energy and that passion come back in him. And it was, again, not because he was necessarily talking to somebody of importance, but rather because he was talking to somebody that he admired and respected. So there's no question that Secretary Mattis is deserving of this award tonight on its merits, but this is in part a way for the college to fulfill its commitment to the senator to bind someone he revered in his life to the life of the college. So before we hear from Secretary Mattis and hear him offer his thoughts on service, I want to invite Lynn Glenn, the senator's daughter, to offer some remarks on behalf of the Glenn family.
I think many people, when they start to speak, they say good evening, but I'm going to say good day because today's the longest day of the year. So when we exit this evening, we'll all go out into wonderful daylight. As Trevor said, Dad had great admiration for the person I've called for years, General Mattis, and I'm just getting used to Secretary Mattis. And if Dad were here, I think I know just a couple of things that he might say. Not just that he's a Marine, Secretary Mattis, and also, as Trevor has said, he's a tremendous patriot and has been a patriot like Dad for his life. That's been his commitment. But Dad was also extremely impressed with this man, when he moves from place to place, has thousands of books that move with him. He is a scholar, and he's a student of history and a student. Dad used to refer to him as tell people about that. And another thing that was Dad would refer to him as a soldier scholar or a scholar soldier, because that's how Dad honored Secretary Mattis. But another part of one thing that Dad knew about Secretary Mattis that absolutely touched him so deeply. When General Mattis retired, General Mattis became a civilian, and his mother lives in Seattle. And so he was going to go drive across country to see his mother. But the detail of that is that Secretary Mattis made a list of the Gold Star mothers across the country that had, I think most of you know what a Gold Star mother is, and he went to those people to pay his respects. And Dad was so touched by that, so deeply touched. And that to me speaks to the character of the man who now is Secretary of Defense. Another part that speaks to me about the Secretary is that he did stay in touch with Dad through the years, but also when Dad even started to dwindle a bit, he kept in touch. And after Dad died, we certainly didn't know, and what Trevor said was true. I mean, I can't tell you, Dad would literally rise to the moment when I would say to him, or someone would say, well, General Mattis is on the phone, and he was just so, that meant more to him than I think General Mattis or Secretary Mattis can ever know. Not just because they're both Marines, but they are both patriots as well. But more than that, on a personal level, I don't know how many of you saw when Dad's burial occurred. The service, as Trevor said, was in Ohio, and Dad was not buried until April 6th. And that was Mom and Dad's 74th wedding anniversary. And that's why we chose the day. And it was pouring down rain. And I had been told that Secretary Mattis would be there, but he'd be sitting in a certain spot. And when I stood up to make brief remarks, I noticed that that's where he was. But this Marine patriot human being came to the graveside for the burial and was there with all of us and got called away for some business that involves being Secretary of Defense. And in addition to that, Mother and I went back to Ohio the day Dad was buried. We thought that Mother at 97 would like to be at home for a bit after all the activity around Dad's burial. Mother's home, and the day after the burial, April 7th, the phone rang. I was sitting at Dad's desk and the phone rang, and I said, hello, and this voice said, may I please speak to Annie? And I said, may I ask who's calling, please? And he said, well, this is Jim Mattis. And I said, Mr. Secretary. I was kind of floored, and he said, no, call me Jim. And we talked for quite a while, and at the end of the conversation, he said, now, where are you? Where are you and your mother? You're out here, aren't you? Aren't you out in Potomac? And I said, no, sir, we flew back to Ohio yesterday. And he said, oh, he was very disappointed because he wanted to stop by to visit Mother the day after my dad was buried. A small town sort of thing to do, but also something that a genuine, more than thoughtful, compassionate human being would do. And so I think some of that is what Dad would share with you. And another story, and you might not understand where I'm going with this, but many of you might know that Mom and Dad, when Dad would go off to some of his exploits, very life-threatening, and the various things he did, to say goodbye, Dad would give Mother a stick of double mint gum. And he would say to her, I'm just going down to the store. I'll be back. And she kept that. Dad gave each of us in the family a stick of double mint when he went back into space when he was 77. And I was trying to think, there were people who became so incredibly helpful, more than helpful, pivotal to Dad's service in Ohio and also here, and also just the meaning for some people through Dad's life these last many years. So I decided, for some people, I wanted to give them something. Will you please come up, Secretary Mattis? I made double mint gum for different people. It's needlepoint, and I do a bit of needlepoint. It can be hung on a kitchen cabinet, a Christmas tree, be used as a bookmark maybe. But I made this for you, Secretary. The first word you will see is, of course, your name, and then it says Semper Fi, which is from Dad. And from me is my name and the date, because the human being you are is so, you are a man of my dad's nature, sensitivity, and sensibility, and I'm so proud to have known you through him. So have a stick of gum and come back safe.
Oh my God, Lynn. I remember that. Thank you. Lynn, thanks so much. Just a flood of memories come back as you spoke. Only in America could a guy with 3 years of college be standing here recognized by a college like one of the Ohio State University. But Dean, Dean, to be here today, just think what happens to you when you say the words John Glenn. Just think of what comes to mind when you hear those words, a gentleman whose name alone was his passport to the trust of the American people. And I would just say here in Washington, D.C., I was talking to some of the young students earlier, a town that sometimes has a wonderfully rambunctious partisan air, but Republican or Democrat would make no difference when you say those two words, John Glenn. The trust is there, and we look upon someone like that with such awe today, but we never thought, even when we were around him, just to take him for granted, because it was just a power to John Glenn and what he represented. And I do not have, I will tell you right up front, ladies and gentlemen, I do not have the words to fully express my admiration and respect for Lynn's father, for Annie's husband, for a man who did what he did. You know, we all need role models in this world. We all need them because they inspire us to listen to our better angels. They remind us, if we look at someone like this, that we can always be better the next day. And there's a song that I still remember. I didn't understand it much at the time, and it's so old today you have to listen to National Public Radio to hear it played. But it was by a group called Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And it kind of goes, you, when you're on the road, must have a code that you can live by. I didn't really understand it, but we're all on a road, we're all on a journey, we all need a code. And the role models we choose to remind us of what we can be in this country that gives us so many beautiful opportunities. Among mine, as I looked at the world that I was so fortunate to live in, John Glenn shone very brightly. And for you students here tonight, you're going to have to look long and hard to find a more decent role model, one who lived by virtue, a word that is often not used in today's America, but in fact, if you go back to McGuffey's Reader, if you go back to the 1800s, if you go back to Abraham Lincoln, you find it much more common as we look at how do we evaluate not others, but ourselves, how you evaluate yourself. And I remember a Marine barracks parade one night, Lynn, when your father I was the hosting officer there. And as it gets toward evening, everybody goes and sits in the stands. The Marines are lined up in the dark, and there I was with Senator Glenn and I standing there together in the shadows waiting to go out front, as I told you, young people there, and act important. And as we stood there, John Glenn was reminiscing. Dean, it won't surprise you, he was looking back on his time as a Marine. He said, you know, he said, Jim, I was a Marine for 23 years. Wasn't nearly long enough. Interesting comment for a man who rose to the heights he did in the space program, in the Senate, and certainly in the hearts of us all. And you think of a man who fought in World War II, became an ace during Korea, the first man to orbit the Earth, his time in the Senate for a quarter of a century, and he exemplified, I think, the expression which is so dear to the American Marines of Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, because he was always faithful to his country, to his Marines, and certainly to his family, and to his childhood sweetheart, Annie. And certainly with his kids, too, and Annie at his side in person when he was stateside, and in spirit when he was at war or when he was in outer space. He would even paint their names on the side of his airplane when he went into combat, which says something about the link that would never be broken, the physical space notwithstanding. I got to know him, excuse me, and Annie, thanks to my former boss, Deputy Secretary of Defense Rudy De Leon, who joined us here this evening. I was Rudy's senior military assistant, and he was quite aware that I swore I will never set foot in the Pentagon again when I leave your duty. Be very careful what you proclaim to yourself or the world, I will warn you. But he was also, for many years, with Senator Glenn on the Hill, and a noted public servant in his own right. And I would tell you, too, that he taught me a bit about Senator Glenn, and then I was, of course, exposed to the senator, and I would get him talking on many occasions on the phone or in person. And when you think of a man born in 1921, and humankind had barely really gotten its aviator wings in the air at that time, and eventually he would actually take us into outer space. And I think that he always excelled. He didn't just dabble in things. And for you young folks, again, to pick out something that you really love, that you really want to throw yourself into and excel, is a part of having meaning in life. So pick wisely and work hard. Flying in Korea, you know, one of the greatest stories I think I ever heard was when he talked about what it was like, the disappointment he felt when he flew a mission and he didn't run into the enemy. He was actually disappointed about that. Eventually, the ground crew painted on the side of his aircraft, MiG, Mad Marine. In other words, he loved going after MiG so much, they thought he was crazy. But he was always faithful to his fellow Marines, and in that war in Korea, a Marine reservist who was making a lot of money, the finest baseball player of his era, one of the finest ever, Ted Williams, came back on active duty when his country called. He didn't try to get out of it. Came back on active duty, and guess who his wingman was? None other than John Glenn. What an all-American story that is when you think of these two flyboys up there together. And he was, granted in his later years, especially some of Ted Williams' language was somewhat uncouth, but Annie could walk into his house with the senator, and as soon as she heard the first bad word, she'd say, "Now, Theodore, stop that." And the finest baseball player in the world immediately kowtowed to Miss Annie and carried on listening to his better angels. One time, Ted Williams was hit by enemy fire and his plane on fire. You know, he's coming in and everyone's telling him to punch out. And of course, in those days, the way you punched out was very injurious. He knew he'd probably never play baseball again if he survived. So he rode the plane in. And I think all the way in, it was John Glenn coaching him in to land a plane on fire without its wheels down. And you can imagine that's just one more time that cool hand John Glenn was able to be there, always faithful alongside others. And you'll notice a theme here that he sticks with you. The tough times to him are just times to get tougher. You don't fade away. And after serving in Korea, becoming a Navy test pilot, he got interested in space, and you all know what happened. He excelled once again, strapping himself to the head, to the nose cone of what was then an intercontinental ballistic missile that could launch him into outer space. And some ladies with slide rules had figured out, yeah, we think we can bring you back too if you do this and that. And wouldn't you know, something went wrong. And for those of you who've been to the third floor there and looked at that little handle of what he had to bring, it looks like something out of the 1970s video game or something, or no, we didn't even have video games then. And to think he was able to bring her home like that, and a 14-year-old Lynn watched her father, probably holding her breath, for somewhere around several hours, hoping that Dad would get home. So he comes out of NASA, he becomes this celebrated leader on the Senate floor. When John Glenn spoke, he was listened to. There was not just a gravitas, there was an actual mastery, again, of what he was doing, and a deep and abiding love for the people he represented and for the Senate itself, something to remember when we're in a town that sometimes takes cheap shots at an organization that so much is riding on. He was a man who rode for the brand, as we say out west. He stuck with it, and in good times and bad, you saw him keep his honor clean. He kept cool, and Annie withstood it all right alongside him, right on through it all. So you give this stature of this man and his family, and you have to say, at Ohio State, the Glenn College faculty and students, the Buckeye community, I would just tell you right up front, I am humbled by this award, and you can understand why. When I think of standing here and being recognized in the words of the dean and the words of Lynn, his beloved daughter, I would just tell you that it's about public service. It's not about me. It's not about me, and I'm not being falsely modest here. It's about public service. We're trying to build a country here, and it's noble work, and it's never done. Up here, I think it's about an hour's drive northwest of here, there's a battlefield cemetery at a place called Antietam, and there's a Union soldier up on a pillar there, a statue of one. He's overlooking his comrades, but that pillar is inscribed with the words, not for themselves, but for their country. And you think of that long-held tradition and how simply it was portrayed by the man we call Senator John Glenn, not for himself, but for his country. It was not even a burden for him. It was truly a pleasure when you met with him and talked with him. I was up in New York City when I first met him for the July 4th ceremony. We were on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, which is pretty wonderful. And Annie Glenn just thought it was a hoot that my date that night was Dr. Ruth. You young folks don't know who that is, and that's a good thing. But Annie she couldn't get over it. She'd never let me forget it either, I might add, about what a delightful date I had that night.
Mother just told that story.
I'm not surprised that Lynn's mom just told that story. It has caused me no end of grief, I will tell you that. But I would tell you, too, that as we build this country in John Glenn's image, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to remember it doesn't matter where you do it, where you contribute, your family, your parish, your school district, your county, your state, your country, the military, civil service, the intelligence agencies. Wherever it is a noble mission, and you have to remember that, especially when the going gets rough, and it's gotten a little rough here in our beautiful country. I would just tell you, too, that we give an awful lot of authority to young officers, for example, in the military. We don't always give them enough authority, and we do that on purpose to remind them when we give them the responsibility and not enough authority, it's going to be your teamwork. It's working with each other in public service. It means putting aside petty grievances. It means accepting the humanity of the people standing and working next to you, not characterizing them by a certain political stripe or another, rather by their humanity, by their being the mother of a girl trying to get into college, the father of a son with MS. It's by remembering we're more connected than we are separated by those issues that have to do with our vision for this country as we all work together to turn it over in as good a shape or better than we received it. That's our obligation to the next generation. I think, too, that when you look at John Glenn's friendship with those of us that he impacted, it always amazed me that he drew no distinction between those of high rank or low. We were sitting in New York's best deli, and a young girl came up to us, very crowded, you know New York, you know the delis, okay, you get the picture. And she comes up, she's knee-high to a duck, and she's got her napkin, and she puts it up and asks, "John Glenn, can I have your autograph?" And of course, guess what happened then? The line formed, and they're coming up. Well, we had the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and guess what? There's always these guys with earphones and guns, you know? So at one point, I asked the senator, if you want, we can have the bodyguards take care of this. He said, no. He said, these people all paid my paycheck for my entire life. The least I can do is sign a napkin or two. Modest, humble, everybody counts. Doesn't matter where they're from. Doesn't matter a bit. They're human beings. They have a divine spark, and he's going to connect. And that has got to inspire us to be better ourselves each day and for the rest of our lives. And so please make sure as you work, and sometimes you get frustrated because our country is imperfect. Thank God she's imperfect. It gives us all something to roll up our sleeves and do. But as you get sometimes worn out a little bit by it all, just remember, John Glenn didn't get worn out by it. He didn't suck his thumb. He kept at it. He kept at it, and he kept at it. He held the line on his honor. He held the line on treating others with a sense of decency. I'm sure he was as tempted as anyone with the frustrations of the day. And as you go on through your life, as you go on through your career, just remember, too, something that Joshua Chamberlain, a man who had also fought in the Civil War, and not that John Glenn did, but I mean a man who fought in a Civil War, said that in great deeds, something abides. And I bring that up because there's greatness in every life. It's just a matter of you giving it that sort of attention, the sort of attention that comes from putting others first. So as we say in the Marines, Semper Fi, John Glenn, always faithful. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm humbled to be here. One thing I would like to do is offer these folks over here, because they know what's coming, the opportunity to ask a question or two so that you can be reassured about what the young students of the Ohio State University bring to bear. So who's going to come after me with the first one? They're prepared for this, so there shouldn't be much of a pause at all. What's it like to work with President Trump? It's an adventure. But I will tell you that he is a keener listener than his TV persona would indicate, that he will listen. You've got to have it all together and make sure that you can drive the point home. But you know, when the president calls on you, Republican or Democrat, there's only one answer in America, and you go. And you don't go half-stepping, you don't go half-hearted, you go what we say in the Marines, that should show you I am an intellectual, totus porcus. That's Latin for whole hog, okay? But my point is, you stick with the country, you stick with our processes, you keep the faith, and you go for it, okay? There was another question, I think, over, yeah.
You talked earlier about really helping government and the Constitution. Do you have a favorite article or a favorite amendment?
A favorite article in the Constitution? Yeah. As a matter of fact, I do have a favorite article in the Constitution. It's Article 1. Article 1 is not the president, not the executive. It's what? Legislative. Very good. It's legislative, and why do I like it? Let me tell you about John Glenn's Marine Corps. It does not exist today, thanks to the love of the presidency, of any presidency, probably. It does not exist today because of the Office of Management and Budget or the Department of Defense. It exists today thanks to the House of Representatives and the Senate, because for some reason, that probably thanks to former Marines like John Glenn, they make certain whatever the president asks for, they top it off a little bit, okay? You get it? So I have fallen in love with Article 1 of the Constitution because that's the legislative branch, and that's been the saving grace of the U.S. Marine Corps. Yes, go ahead.
What's your favorite book or work of literature?
It's hard to pick out a favorite book. Certainly Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is one that will remind you on a bad day, things going wrong, maybe some people find a little bit of fault with you. You read that book and you remind yourself that you just choose your own response to whatever happens around you. You don't have to choose a negative one. Good things and bad things, as we were talking about earlier, young folks, good things and bad things happen in everybody's life. And, you know, you've just got to decide the only thing you can really control in this world is your response to what happens. And as you do that, it'll also teach you, it'll remind you that other people are carrying a heavy burden. And so don't add to it. Try to see them through life, not see through them in a way to put yourself forward. There was another question down. Yeah, go ahead, right here.
I was going to say, being Secretary of Defense, I'm sure, comes with a lot of responsibilities. But what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of it for you? What have you learned from it so far?
What's the most rewarding part of being Secretary of Defense? It is the unbelievable young people who every year, high quality, eye-wateringly high quality young people who look beyond the hot political rhetoric, who rally to the flag, who basically what they do at age, 18, this young gal, this young guy, is they sign a blank check to all of you, payable with their lives, to protect this experiment. And it just floors me. It is an unbelievable honor to be around them. It sobers me every day when I walk in. It gets me through 4 congressional hearings in 1 week. Without using language that Annie would be calling me by James instead of Jim. It keeps us human. You know, it keeps us human. Yes, ma'am.
You talked a lot about John Glenn's legacy, not only at Ohio State, but throughout his career service. What kind of legacy do you hope to leave?
You know, what kind of legacy would I hope to leave? You know, I try not to think about it. I try to work on what is the issue and do what is right, so I don't think about how it's going to be written about the next day or how it's going to be looked back upon. Because my hair is gray, I've made more mistakes than most of you in this room. And all you can do is also maintain a certain modesty and a certain forgiveness of yourself. And don't allow yourself to start thinking you're writing a book. When you're in the job, do the job and turn over whatever you're doing. Just try to turn it over a little bit better. The first time I saw this word usufruct, U-S-U-F-R-U-C-T, was written by Thomas Jefferson. And basically he said we hold our responsibilities in usufruct. I didn't quite understand that. That's not a quote, it's close. And he was a planter. He was a farmer. And what it means is you can cut down the trees, you can change where the water goes, you can plant field, but you must turn the land over. You do whatever you want. You must turn it over in as good a shape or better than you found it. And that's where that theme came from for how I try to deal with it. And frankly, I leave it to people who will judge me how they want to do it. One day I'll be back on the banks of the Columbia River walking with my dog and whistling, you know. Yes, ma'am.
How do you make tough decisions, or do you have any advice on making tough decisions?
How do you make tough decisions? Really, I watched Deputy Secretary of Defense De Leon. You watch other people make these and focus on the essence of the issue, not on what people are going to think of you when you get done. You quantify every issue as much as you can. You should start with quantification. You may only be able to quantify 10%, but you should at least do that much. Some things you can quantify 80%. If you don't quantify at all, then you're lazy. If you over-quantify it, then you're mechanical. So knowing when to go with your head and at what point do you apply your heart. And I think if you always try to do it in that manner, you won't be too impulsive, but you also won't be paralyzed by trying to do everything, kind of by a script or something. I'd have to think about it. If I think of anything else, I'll see you afterward and I'll tell you, okay? That's a very good question. That may not be a sufficient answer. Any other questions from you young folks over there? Yes, sir. Oh, no, you're not. No, that was the lady's arm behind you that was there, not yours being up. Okay. Well, I think we've about worn everybody out, Dean, so back over to you. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So it seems superfluous to say this after you've all just applauded so resoundingly, but please join me in congratulating this year's winner of the John Glenn College's Excellence in Public Affairs. So that was truly tremendous, but hopefully the night's not over. I know some of you are about to dash off to the U2 concert, but the bar is still open and there's food, and hopefully you all will have an opportunity to connect. So please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you for attending tonight.